Hi there, welcome to today's webinar brought to you by the Cyber Hut and Intro Security. We'll get started momentarily. We'll just let people get joined. Hi there, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar brought to you by the Cyber Hut and Intro Security. Fabulous topic, NHIs, non-human identities, and how to get the first step in understanding and tackling this security challenge. Before we get started into today's content, a little bit of housekeeping. Before we start, obviously we are on Zoom today, so everybody is centrally muted, but we do have the chat and Q&A functionality available to us. So please put your comments and questions in there as we go, and I will try to interweave some of those questions into our discussions as we go along. But we'll also leave probably 5 or 10 minutes at the end as well to wrap up any questions that you may have. Today's content is obviously being recorded as well, so you can view this on demand or again afterwards at your leisure, and of course you'll be sent a link to that afterwards. What a fabulous topic. Non-human identity has been one of our biggest inquiry topics over the past sort of 12, 18 months. Absolutely privileged to be here discussing this today. But I guess maybe quick start off with some introductions. My name is Simon Moffat. I'm founder at the Cyber Hut, which is a globally renowned research agency looking at all of the exciting identity security topics facing us, including obviously non-human identities as well. I've been fortunate just to be in this space for a couple of decades, I guess, and there hasn't been anything I don't think as exciting as non-human identity has been over the past probably 24 months. It's been a real inquiry and research topic for ourselves, and one which many organizations, large, small enterprise organizations, are desperate to understand how to get started. What are the capabilities? Why is this becoming a major problem now? So absolutely thrilled to be here chatting with Itzik from Intro. Itzik, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good, Simon. Thanks for having me.
Not at all. Not at all. Looking forward to our conversation. I guess maybe just start us off with your sort of background and history, and how you got to building up Intro Security.
Yeah, for sure. So Itzik Alvas, the co-founder and CEO of Entro Security. Entro is a non-human identity lifecycle management and secret security company. We pioneered that vertical. So a bit about myself. Started almost 20 years ago back at the Israeli Defense Force. I was in one of the intelligence units over there. I was doing offensive cyber back then, but then moved to the industry, to the public market, and switched to defensive cybersecurity. So prior to Entro, I was responsible for the internal security of one of Microsoft's clouds. Before that, I was a CISO of the largest healthcare services organization in Europe, where I was breached by non-human identities. So, like a couple of weeks after migrating to the cloud over there, we were breached by non-human identities. And then at Microsoft, we were breached twice by non-human identities. So
Okay.
after the third time that I was breached by non-human identities, I basically started to think about the problem, and yeah, went and joined forces with a friend of mine back from the army. Adam Shriki is the CTO, and we
Mm.
started Entro that basically created that market and vertical.
I love that. I love the fact that you just drop in there the fact that you, first of all, you were on the offensive side, which is pretty cool, I think, in itself. But equally now doing the defensive work, I think that having the ability to look at both camps, I think, is really, really interesting and really powerful. But also just that practitioner experience as well. You've been there, you've felt the pain of some of these things. You've felt the real impact ultimately of breaches related to NHI, the cost of management, the difficulty of management. I think that's quite unique. Actually, it's quite a powerful thing, isn't it, to have been burnt, if you like, by some of these problems, and then obviously now building out solutions. So, we're looking forward to this conversation. Today's agenda, obviously, we keep things loose on the industry webinars, but ultimately, really to understand why is NHI stuff become priority today. And I said earlier, it's been a top inquiry topic for the Cyber Hut of the past 12, 18 months. Organizations coming to us just wanting to understand, what is this space? How does it work? How can we integrate this technology? How can we improve visibility? How can we improve remediation and so on? So we're going to launch with that, and then basically get into what does a good solution look like in this space. We'll talk about life cycles of people. I think we're quite well versed in managing life cycles of people. Taking some of those concepts into the NHI space is vitally important. And obviously, how can we get started? What are those first steps and some of the first immediate things organizations can do? So, and I guess let's build this sort of problem statement ultimately. Why is NHI suddenly becoming a top priority? And it is difficult because we speak with CISOs, C-level identity leaders, business leaders, digital leaders as well. They all have priorities. They all have finite resources. They don't have enough cash. They don't have enough people. They have alert fatigue. They have more apps they need to migrate or develop. They have to do things faster than ever before. But there's one which is becoming consistent, and it is this NHI aspect. And a couple of things I want to sort of pull out here. And one is, I guess, the bit of the definitions, really, terminology and semantics, ultimately around NHIs and secrets, which is something we have to engage a little bit around educating the market around what some of these topics mean, and machine identity sort of pops in there as well. And love to get your sort of view here on this definition. I think, we're quite good, if you like, about human identity definitions of employees and customers. And then a few years ago, we had the secrets management problem, if you like, around vaulting of things and having to manage cryptographic secrets, and that migration from HSMs to the cloud key management system. So that terminology is a little bit understood. But how does the NHIs fit in here? Well, I've got my own opinions, but love to bring you in here straight away. And what's your immediate view of this?
Yeah, no, I think you are right. We should probably start with a bit of a definition, just to frame everything for everyone, to level it up. So, non-human identities and secrets, sometimes, people are treating them as the same, which is kind of true, but not really. Non-human identities are actually the entities, the programmatic entities that enables identity or some sort of an authentication for applications when those applications are trying to communicate with other applications or maybe resources they need, like database and so forth. So if the application needs to authenticate against the database and connect to the database, they're using non-human identities in order to facilitate that authentication and connectivity. But so that's the entities, and you're attaching permissions to it. So you can give the non-human identity admin permission over your MongoDB or RDS database and so forth. The activities are over there, some attributes are over there. Secrets are actually the credentials of that non-human identity. Okay, so you're creating a non-human identity, you're giving it permissions and other attributes, but the credentials of that non-human identity is actually what the application is using to authenticate against the resource, MongoDB in our scenario. So again, those are the actual credentials of that non-human identity. So that's secrets, that's non-human identities, just to level up the field over here. So yeah, go ahead.
No, that's great. That's great, and it's so simple if when you describe it in those terms. And it's again, if you take it back to the sort of human world, if you like, we have an identity profile, which may be created, it's verified, it's onboarded, maybe stored in a directory, or whatever. And then there's a credential aspect. It could be a biometric, it could be a password.
Correct?
Hopefully not passwords, but you know, there's a credential life cycle in there, an MFA aspect, and then we talk about authorization, session management, enforcement points, etc. So it's exactly the same thing. And as soon as you start to apply those basic building blocks to the NHI world, you're then thinking, oh, wow, actually, we need a life cycle of capabilities. We need more than just, as you say, a cryptographic, maybe a certificate or whatever. Yeah, that's part of it, but there's a much broader thing. And I think as soon as you instantly there describe it in such simple terms, you then go, yeah, absolutely, we need to have identity management, we need to have the entity, then the credential, then the right sizing, and it's just a bigger thing, isn't it?
Right, you can't really do one without the other. So there are
Mm.
some companies out there that are doing non-human identities but don't do secrets, which is I don't understand it. And then there are other companies like secret scanners and so forth. They are searching for those credentials of the non-human identities, those secrets, but they are not really attaching it or protecting the non-human identity. You really need to do both in
Yeah.
order to secure your non-human identities. Um, yeah, for sure.
It's got to be end to end, hasn't it? I think the next thing for me is they're everywhere, and this as soon as you start to uncover and work on those definitions and say, look, well, if you are talking about an interaction between APIs, between workloads, between anything maybe to infrastructure to do with AI, because AI is everywhere. Once you have those interactions, those access paths without a human involved, that just proliferates. And I love there's another number here which is always good: 92-1 ratio between humans and non-humans, and that comes from your own research report, which I think there's a link going to be sent around afterwards here. So that's your sort of state of NHI report for 2025. So 92 times the relationship there between people is huge. And obviously, we've been going through this microservices migration for probably a decade or more, moving to agile, moving to much faster way of delivering integration. We have cloud service provider adoption, the big three there, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, but whole host of other SaaS providers really, which are going to be integrating API first ultimately. We have all automation pipeline. And obviously the last probably 18 months, I guess, the whole sort of chat GPT aspect and the conversational AI, agentic AI is everywhere. And that, of course, is a brand new beast around how you manage both the data, access the data, and all of the connectivity there. So is 92-1, is that now a conservative estimate, do you think? Is it going to be higher next year, do you think?
I'm sure. So that's by the way, it's an insane number, right? For every
Yeah.
human employee you have within the organization, you will have on average 92 non-human identities, which is insane. And yes, I think it will only grow. Like I know it will only grow. The last metric we had was by Gartner back in 2021. They saw an average of 1 for 45. So for every
Yeah. Yeah.
human employee will have 45 non-human identities. And then we took our customer base, so we have the biggest customer base in the industry, and we ran some metrics over it. Anonymized, but great metrics, and one of them is this one, like 1 to 92. So basically, over doubling the number of non-human identities within less than 4 years. And yes, it will only increase. And when you think about it again, like non-human identities, applications are using them in order to access and authenticate resources they need, right? Like databases, storage account. And you wrote over here microservices. So we used to add monolith. Now we're breaking that monolith to microservices. So instead of one set of keys, one set of non-human identities, credentials per a monolith, now we have set of credentials, set of secrets for each microservice. More
Yeah.
cloud services we use, more non-human identities to authenticate against them, right? For every new offering we're using in the cloud or on-prem, we will need some, or the application will need some way to authenticate against it, and that's a new secret, a new non-human identity. So yeah, it will only increase.
100%. I think it will increase. And I think for all the things you said there, and as well, I think organizations are just becoming more aware of the problem. So they are looking and understanding, okay, what about APIs? What about third parties, supply chains, etc.? And I think as identity is sort of moving from being an operations aspect to really being a pillar of cyber, data security, endpoint security, business productivity, and others, you suddenly see, as you describe, all of those tentacles just becoming more proliferated throughout migration, digital delivery, B2C ecosystem, so delivery of consumer-facing apps, privacy preservation, all of those systems, services will be needing an NHI backbone, which I think it isn't going to get smaller. I think that is for sure. And the other thing which I think has fascinated us at the Cyber is, when you start asking and talking and researching what this is all about, it isn't just one type. I think, the human space has had a bit of a proliferation in the types of identity available. 15 years ago, it was staff, in the LDAP sort of Novell or AD Active Directory, and then that extended a little bit maybe to federated partners, and then you have a B2C thing going on with customers and citizens and stuff. But they're quite big chunks. You can sort of bucket these into quite easy chunks and so on. But as soon as you look at this space, it's basically saying, well, okay, it could be a service account, the old-fashioned service account thing. It could be right the way through to some sort of agentic AI credential linking up multiple different back-end repositories. You've got API keys, you've got all of that stuff around OAuth 2 clients, which can be hugely misused. OAuth 2 is absolutely superb, very broad, often very complex to implement. There's a whole OAuth 2 landscape in there. Is there anything missing on this one? There seems to be another sort of type getting added in
So,
each
so,
week.
so yes, like we're at Entro, we're supporting over 1,200 types of
Wow.
non-human identities. Yeah, that's so again, like there are a lot. So 1,200 types. That's and over that. That's what we support in around non-human identity types at Entro, and there are more. So while you have over here the most common one, if you will, there are a lot of different types of non-human identities and secrets. So yeah, for sure.
What are some of the most sort of obscure edge ones that you've discovered and found?
Yeah, there's a lot. Like any and every SaaS offering out there, or
Yeah.
again, any offering out there can create their own key
Okay.
that
Yeah.
they're create some sort of an algorithm. Maybe we'll call it like Simon with 1, 2, 3 at the end, and that's a token, and the application will accept it and let you authenticate with it, and so forth. So there are a lot of types out there, and in order to find all of them, to keep them secure, like that's a huge challenge. But I agree, like service accounts, API keys. I don't see connection strings over here,
Oh,
which
voice
are
connections.
widely
Okay. Yeah.
used for database access and so forth.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
but I agree, most of the most common non-human identities are over here on that slide, which makes up like 60, usually about 60% of
Okay.
yeah, on average organization landscape. The other 40% are the less common one.
And I imagine as well, because this landscape is changing, you need to have a platform which can adapt to this stuff. Ultimately, you're having just an OAuth 2, client sort of management system is great, but I imagine you need to be very flexible and in being able to discover, identify, classify. I guess that's a big part of the platform sort of
Yeah,
kit.
correct. And by the way, like auth token are usually the most safe one, if you will. It's not easy to abuse them. It's not easy to use them as an attacker and so forth. Usually all tokens are to connect between two SaaS vendors, like the default integration between two SaaS. So if you're using, I don't know, Calendly to connect to your calendar, it will be facilitating using an auth token, which is pretty much safe. You can auto-rotate them and so forth. So that's not the problematic one, like that's the safest one. But definitely API keys like connection strings, service accounts, those are being neglected.
Mhm.
So yeah, but again, you need to guard every single one of them.
And I think that's it. You're only as strong as your weakest link, so you need to have that
Correct.
broad coverage, of course. Then,
Correct.
we'll do a quick question that's just popped in. We'll try and keep on top of these as they go. Question asking about the market and stuff, but then more importantly, it seems to be the perception of the business that NHI is just a problem of the sort of IT teams, and how they should take care of it. Any arguments there? Is it just an IT operations thing, or is it more security and compliance? What's your sort of view there?
I think it's a cross-department problem. I think, like, I understand why we're asking about IT over here. IT are, or and IM teams sometimes, but IT are the ones who are creating human identities for an organization, which is it's been around for a long time. We have our processes. It's pretty straightforward now to understand how to create them. You have a new employee, you're creating his human identity at your Active Directory, Okta, whatever you guys are using. And then you're adding him to some security groups, which gives him permissions, and you're able to manage his lifecycle. But I think the caveat over here is that everything about your employee. You know his SSN, you know where he lives, you know
Yeah.
his name, you know everything about it. Usually the problem with non-human identities are they are being created, permissioned, used by development teams, by developers, DevOps, SREs, and so forth, because developers needs them in order to enable their application to connect to the resources the application needs, right? And usually those non-human identities are long randomized strings. And that means that once they are created, it's so easy to lose track of them. You can use
Mhm.
them with one application and then with another application, and like you don't really know anything about them. You don't have context. Again, long randomized strings, and it's not easy to understand when they should be offboarded, when they should be rotated or resetted, and so forth. So I think that's the main difference. It's easy for IT teams to create those human identities and managing them. It's not as easy for them to do it for the
Yeah.
non-human identity side because though it's really like a development process.
Yeah. I think you're right. In the human space, you sort of know the problem statement, if you like. You understand how many employees will join, how many will leave. Even in the sort of B2C world, you sort of know what an identity profile will look like. You'll know what credentials they will use, and you sort of know the behaviors to an extent. So it's a slightly more controlled ecosystem. But I think in the NHI thing, not only do you have a broader variety, but as you say, they could be getting created from different areas. There's no
They
single
are
source
created
of
from
truth.
different areas. If you need to authenticate against, again, MongoDB, you are creating the non-human identity at the
Yeah,
MongoDB level. If you
yeah,
need to connect to Azure, you're creating the non-human identity at Azure, at Microsoft Azure. So there's like no one place to control them all, like we have with Active Directory or Okta. And again, you need to understand how they are being used. It's super easy to understand how a human will use his human identity, send emails or connecting to shared locations, storage locations. It's not easy to understand how the application will use it. If it's a script, it's different. If it's a UI, it's different. And so it's not easy for IT teams to actually go ahead and manage them.
No, and I think you're right. The behaviors are different, aren't they, as well? It's, as you say, the MongoDB thing versus an OAuth2 client versus something that they're going to behave differently. They're going to have different starting points, ending points, usage. And I think that sort of segues nicely into back to why is this a priority? And it is causing a load of complications. And we have things you mentioned there about centralized visibility or lack of, because everything is getting created everywhere. There's no single source of truth. So there isn't one person or one team creating stuff. It's distributed creation.
Correct.
Lack of monitoring. The credential aspect is entirely fragmented as well. So you have different credential providers, perhaps different ways, not being stored effectively. But things are often static as well. So somebody creates a coding pipeline, don't necessarily have that as part of a routine of rotation in there as well. So there's a lot of problems, which then the implications of that are frightening because it impacts lots of different parts of the business, not just the SecOps or security or identity. Ultimately, it could have a huge impact on data breach, data exfiltration, lateral movement. The attack surface is increasing because you've already said there's 92 to 1 and growing. So this perimeter problem is getting bigger. So there's a lot of people involved here, a lot of different stakeholders, I think, can benefit from improving NHI, I think.
Yeah, no, correct. And we have no magic solutions over there like we have
Yeah.
for human identities. MFA can be one of them. You're unable to use MFA with non-human identities, unfortunately, right? So if you have a human identity and for every time that he needs to authenticate against something, he's getting, an SMS with a one-time password. That's pretty safe. That's pretty safe to do. You're unable to do it like application
Yeah.
can't do that, unfortunately. And there are so many other controls in place for human identities that unfortunately is not available, and I don't think will be available for non-human identities.
No, that's absolutely fair. And it does remind me a little bit of the sort of B2C thing which emerged sort of 10, 15 years ago when you sort of said, okay, we'll just take those existing B2E components and just repurpose them for external identity, which never worked, of course. It was just spawned
Right.
a new industry. And it's exactly the same. And I think absolutely, there are definitely some principles we can talk about and say, look, okay, how can we do strong authentication for NHI? How can we do rotation? How can we improve this sort of source of truth problem? So we have experiences in the human world, but the tooling, the frameworks, the stakeholders, they just seem very different to me. They seem like it's a different audience, different technologies needed. It just seems like a brand new thing to me.
Yeah.
Alrighty, what does that thing look like? What does that solution area look like? Which is, I think the big thing for me. I think we're going to touch on this a little bit later as well. Is we need to think broad, don't we? We need to think end to end of these NHIs. Where are they being created? What are they being used for? What does the risk look like with this? Absolutely, there's a credentialing aspect here, but it just looks there's a broad set of capabilities. Is that fair? Are we looking at a platform play? I think.
Yeah, it's fair. Like there's so the main problem that we're seeing in the industry is because those developers or technical teams are the ones who are creating them, permissioning them, using them. A lot of the time they are scattering them around, so they can store them within
Yeah.
vaults, which are a secured storage location, but that's what it is. It's a storage location, and that's it. But they can store them within vaults. We're seeing that for every organization, there's an average of 5 completely different vaults offering. So if you're using Kubernetes, you will store some of your secrets at your Kubernetes secrets. If you're using AWS, you will store some of them at AWS Secrets Manager, GitHub Action Secrets, and so forth. So you will have those secrets and non-human identities will be scattered between different vaults, but then they are also being, committed into code, sent over Slack or Teams, within Confluence manuals and so forth. And the main problem that we're seeing is that security teams or the organization don't really know how many non-human identities they have and
Yeah.
where they are. And again, also those are long randomized strings, and that means that even if a professional will find one, then what? Like, which application is using it? Is it even enabled or already expired? Like, what do I know about it? Usually nothing. And when we combine that we don't know how many we have, where they are, and how they're being utilized, that's why organizations are really struggling to protect them. According to the latest report by IBM, cost of data breach, Verizon reports, Gartner, which are leading the industry, it's the second most frequent attack vector nowadays, and the number one most costly or devastating attack to an organization. So yes, we need to implement what we're seeing over here and probably more in order to
Yeah.
actually tackle that problem and be in front of it.
No, that's interesting. That's interesting. We could segue to a couple of questions. Try and keep the two more come in here. So there's a question about, we've been talking about rotation, and it's funny, we talk about that just like a thing, but rotation of credentials as if it's like this easy thing to achieve, which I think it isn't,
Yeah,
first
it's
of
not
all.
easy.
But the question is more about the other end of the spectrum, which is looking at ephemeral identities, so identities that appear and disappear. Specifically talk about things like tracking, auditing, scaling of that stuff. What's your sort of view on the identity side?
Yeah, I think that's some of the problems with ephemeral. I don't think it's mature enough currently. Um, so okay, first of all, the support, like ephemeral credential, ephemeral secrets, and non-human identity support, it's not really being supported with everything that we're using. It's very limited. Usually the resources your application will need won't support it. But even if they do, and I try to implement that myself at one of my organizations. Even if they do support it, I think those are great comments. Like, what about scalability of them? I'll give you an example. So basically, the flow is once the application is using the non-human identity, it's gone. That's the
Yeah.
ephemeral part of it, okay? And then when the application needs to use it again, there's a process which is gonna create a new one. And again, once it's being used, it's gone. So that's the process. So now what happens if an application is using or a workload, like you have two containers or two workloads from the same application that is using the same token, which is perfectly fine. So now the first workload is using the token, connect to the database, and then the second workload, the second maybe container, want to use the same one. Now it's being created. There's another one that is being created, and the new workload will use that. But the first one will be deleted. That's the ephemeral part of it. And now your
Okay.
first workload is unable to connect to the database. So what are you doing? So you're creating some scripts around it and so forth, and trying to tie stuff together. It's not, unfortunately, it's not mature enough. It's not a good solution. There's a lot of stuff that you need to do in a practical level. Like, it's great for as a concept, and hopefully in the future it will mature. But currently, it's not something that you're actually able to use unless you have a very specific architecture that is based around it. So definitely for your already, developed applications, that's something you are unable to use, and probably for future ones, unless you're really, stitching it together, it's not going to be easy. And of course, monitoring and so forth, it's a problem.
Yeah. No, great answer. Yeah, it's a complicated thing, isn't it? I think that's the main takeaway there.
Yeah.
All right, so we sort of that's the first half an hour. We've sort of built up this picture. It's a big priority. There's a lot going on. It's a broad ecosystem of sort of types, but equally you need a broad set of capabilities. And I want to sort of talk a little bit around how can people start on this journey. I think people realize, look, we need to do something here. We have some sort of semblance of maybe there's a homegrown solution, maybe there's not, but they need to start. And I quite like this. If we internally, the Cyberhawk, do sort of workshop stuff, it's really basic in the sense you need to know where you're heading to, your target profile. You need to understand your current profile, your current ecosystem. And it could be people-based, non-human based, whatever, internal, external. But you need to understand where you are. And I think that's it's an often overlooked bit, isn't it, of NHI? Because people want to be into the solution straight away. We need to buy, I don't know, secrets, vaulting, rotation thing. We need to buy some software. But to me, it's let's understand the problem space first. And I think there's some interesting things for me around, include more stakeholders. This isn't just one team or one area that's impacted. It's going to be multiple areas, whether it's engineering, security, DevOps, others in here. Understand what's there, tooling, the response mechanisms, and so on. And I think it is trying to engage and show the outcomes. And I think there's something I want to pick up with you guys is around, you have this assessment model. It's essentially going in and taking a look at organizations' ecosystem. So how does that work? How does that process start off?
Yeah, I think you are correct. That's with any problem. Before you're jumping to a solution, let's understand what is our problem, and I understood it too late after my third breach, and then that was the time when I tried to use ephemeral non-human identities and completely failed because it's not meeting reality. And And I had the same problem that I described earlier. Like I wanted to at least get an inventory in place, at least understand how many non-human identities I have and where they are. Like at least that, because they are being created from many different resources, there's no one source of truth. I needed that. I needed one source of truth. Um, and then you can build on top of it, right? And then you can try to maybe classify each one of them and enrich and protect. But you need at least an inventory. That was my problem. Maybe for others, they have like an Excel spreadsheet or other thing, and they have the inventory, and maybe they have a different problem. But I agree with you. You need to assess the problem and then choose the best solution for you. And yeah, that's something that that's out of the report that we're providing. So we have like an assessment, a free assessment within our portal. You can ask for it over there. Just log into dot security and start it over there. And that's like one piece of it, where we're giving some of that inventory. So you can, if you have something, you can at least compare. Um, but yeah, that was my biggest problem, and I see that that's what you're showing over here.
I think it's just interesting. I think being able to shine that light into an organization and say, look, this is what you have, which is fine. So I think that itself is quite a difficult step for many people, isn't it? Understanding what we have, how big the problem is, but then helping them, I guess, internally to build the business case or build this security argument to say, look, we have got more identities than we thought. They're a broader spectrum. We need to classify them and understand from a risk perspective, and then do something about that. Build a business case internally to redesign process, expand the coverage. Obviously, ultimately buy some software, I suppose. But it's just trying to, what are you going to exploit? Is it in this case, what it was, unique secrets, locations, where they are, what they're doing, the impact, the blast radius. I think that's the stuff which helps organizations to really say, look, we're not in control of this problem. This is the breadth and depth of the problem, and this is the impact. I think they're really, really important things, which I think many organizations are wanting to get started with, aren't they? Helping internally build the case to say, look, this is a much bigger problem than just auth to clients, for example.
Right, that's a great example over here. Like the main problem or the main breach point for organization is exposure of those tokens.
Yeah.
Um, and that's what we're seeing. That's again out of the assessment. So you will be able to understand, at least from that assessment, you will be able to see how many non-human identities were created in the different creation location. That's the earlier slide we just had. And then how many of them are vaulted within a secure storage location, and then how many of them are exposed outside of where they should be. Like over here, I see environment variables of Azure function and committed into code and sent over Teams and within SharePoint. So yes, that's a great report and a wonderful way to observe the problem and to understand, where is my organization in the maturity level of actually keeping them protected.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely great. I think that's great. It's practical, it's pragmatic for me. I like practical stuff. And it
Yeah.
segues to my question I was going to ask you, which is actually popped up in here. It was more about would this capability, as in NHI management, would it sit within an IAM sort of team? I think is the question, or who do you see as the main sort of stakeholders or people that, for example, this assessment report would be used by?
Right. I think there are two main teams, and usually they are working together, but it differs on the organization, which one will be the owner of a system like intro security or a non-human identity lifecycle management and secret security platform. It can either be application security, because applications are the ones who are using those entities, and basically application security knows how the development process and the different application works and how those non-human identities should be used. So that's one piece, like application security teams. We are seeing them as users, and yes, we're seeing IAM teams as users. It's again, it's depends on the different organization and what they decide, but it's definitely those two, like IM
Mm,
teams and application security teams are
mm.
really between those two.
Yeah, yeah, that's what we've seen as well. Those two, I think the identity guys clearly have the experience, if you like, around the terms, auth N,
Right.
auth Z, conditional access, strong
Yeah.
authentication, enforcement. But then equally, it's the app guys, if you like, or maybe even engineering dev as well, who say, look, this is on our heads here. We have a huge incentive to try and get this fixed because it impacts security, it impacts
Correct.
productivity as well. Engineering effort isn't really, they're not going to make any cash by building their own workload management system. They are paid and incentivized to build applications, deliver business and customer functionality. So there's a productivity thing there, and there's a security and risk thing, hugely as well.
And that's
This,
that's a great
come on.
point, by the way. You don't really want to interfere the developers. You want something out of band that can find all of them, monitor them, protect them, and so forth.
Yeah, yeah, and it has to be easy. Simplify that adoption, as you say, get out of the way of people who are doing stuff. And there's a couple of questions that have popped in again here from the same person, and I want to shoehorn those into the next sort of 15, 20 minutes around amplifying this life cycle sort of conversation and the benefits of handling this stuff. And absolutely, if we sort of zoom out for a little bit and say, look, we're going to deliver an NHI platform. It's going to get consumed by the identity guys, the app security team as well, security compliance audit. Benefits of that are huge, and I think you could instantly say, well, you're going to have automation there, which removes human effort, it removes errors. You have consistent policy, eliminate misconfiguration. We've already said, you could be talking about MongoDB 1 minute, Azure the next, Amazon the next. You need to have standard, clear ways of configuring those systems. External leakage, detection of issues. So there's a huge benefits here. But the big thing for me, we have to think in life cycles, don't we? And I think before we launch into this, there's a couple of questions I want to shoehorn in, and this was asked a little bit earlier there by the anonymous attendee. And it's basically asking about like a taxonomy of identities, which we sort of covered a little bit earlier, but really that mapping into NIST. So the NIST cyber security framework, which I'm sure most people are familiar with these days, we talk about identifying protection, detection, respond, and recover. We're instantly, again, you're into a life cycle, aren't we? You're instantly an end-to-end view. I'm just sort of wondering how your sort of life cycle here is maybe NIST aligned, or is it NIST inspired? What's your sort of take there?
Yeah, no, it's definitely aligned, and I think you like jumped over one slide. Like I saw it for a brief moment, which is
This
exactly
one,
that. Maybe one before that or two before that. Yeah,
this one. Okay,
yeah, exactly that. Like you need to identify. So that's the like the inventory and the classification,
okay.
which goes together because again you need to classify them because those are again long randomized strings, and then in order to actually protect them, so at least that's in terms of the different terms that are being used within the industry. So non-human identity detection and response (NHIDR). It's like an ITDR, but for non-human identities.
Mm,
So that's a great way to understand how those non-human identities are actually being in use and if there's any abuse around them and so forth. And we spoke about different teams and stakeholders. So that's a lot of the time going to the SOC team because it's abnormal behaviors around them. So you will see SOC with their SIEMs and so on and so forth using the NHIDR capabilities. And yes, of course, automated remediation in scale. We talked about 92 to 1. That's on
mm,
the average organization, by the way. So if you have a lot of developers, you will probably have an higher ratio. So you need to have some sort of an automated way in order to mediate all of the risks. Usually when we're entering an environment, it's like a Christmas tree that lights up. So you will need some sort of an automation. So that's like a very high level NIST. And of course, the life cycle that we saw earlier in a bit more details with the different pillars aligned to that as well, for sure.
And I guess you're going through this, I suppose, sequentially. You can't protect what you can't see ultimately. So I presume you're doing that discovery thing first and early to inventorize. But it does seem like it is a non-linear process. By that, I mean you're constantly discovering essentially. So maybe you pick
Correct.
one area and you're having to go back and reiterate those initial inventory aspects. But the classification is a good one. One thing we get asked a lot is how do you link to people? I mean, is that important? To be able to understand. You mentioned owners there. How difficult is
Yeah,
that?
it's quite difficult, but we are doing that with great precision. Um, but yeah, that's basically the different pillars that make up Intro platform, Intro security platform. So again, discovery, you want to make sure that you're finding them at their creation location, storage location, which are usually vaults, and exposure location. Like if you're missing one of them, you don't have a comprehensive inventory. You don't really know how many non-human identities and secrets you have. So that's one huge part of it. Find them at their creation location. Even if someone created a non-human identity but haven't done anything with it, you would like it to be listed as part of your inventory. Again, same with the vaults. If someone stored a new secret over there and exposure location, huge. That's the most important part. This is how attackers are getting in. Classification, yes, ownership assignment, understanding the permissions of them, activities, pretty much everything you need to know in order to understand the blast radius of those non-human identities. So we're creating like a lineage map of which applications, which workloads are using the non-human identity to access what resources and other vital data around them. It's like placing an AirTag over your non-human identities, if you will. And then that's enabling us to do posture management, right? Misconfiguration, static risk analysis, we can take that inventory in the classification and understand the different misconfiguration and risks around them. Non-human identity detection and response, again, we're tracking the activities of each non-human identity, creating an activity baseline, and any deviation from that activity can be considered as a potential breach, and we will run our non-human identity detection and response rules around them or against them. I'll give you an example. Let's say that someone from I know China is using our token, but we're not doing business with China. That's an abnormal behavior, right? If someone is mass downloading secrets from our vault, that's another abnormal behavior, another thing we should probably prevent. And 5 and 6, those are remediation pillars. So yes, streamline the rotation, be able to do that, and you can only do that if you have the lineage map, if you understand how those are being used, and move all of the exposed tokens, which is again a huge problem, into a secure location, vaults, and decommissioning. That's basically removal of any idle, stale, not in use, non-human identities. When we're entering an environment, we usually see that about 40% out of all non-human identities are not in use anymore. They are active, someone can use them, but no one is. And that means that you can probably reduce your attack surface by 40% like that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Good question I've seen emerge a little bit is the rotation thing, and I want to backtrack a little bit on this. And if we sort of go back maybe 10 years, 15 years, it was passwords for people, and there was often the NIST guidelines, and NIST excellent guidelines. I'm not criticizing them at all, but there was obviously 15 years you would have the NIST password stuff around password complexity, change your password every 28 days irregardless, just constantly keep changing it. And obviously now we have password managers that can do that stuff for us. So many websites just say, look, your password's expired, rotate it, irregardless of a breach. Now, I'm wondering what's your view here on sort of, I guess, step 5 and sort of ties in with step 4, I suppose. Do you just say, look, rotate everything continually, whether it's every few minutes, hours, or whatever, or do you say, look, we're only going to rotate it as and when we see something suspicious in our stage 4 there, in our NHI DR? So just wonder what your anecdotal view would be there.
Yeah, so we have a lot of regulation and compliance that requires 90 days key
Okay.
rotation. So in order to be compliant, in some cases, it's mandatory. Like it's not my opinion or not. But if you're taking my opinion, I think the most important piece out of it is the NHI capability and the posture management capability. Like if you can detect when those non-human identities are being misused and someone is using them to do lateral movement or any kind of breach, you're pretty much protected, right? You can't really cover everything. You can't do everything. And if you need to prioritize, I would probably prioritize the misconfiguration. Like let's stop them from actually being vulnerable, and then like let's remove any exposures that we have and so forth, and then let's monitor them, because if someone is trying to use them in order to breach my environment, let's stop him before he succeeds. But yes, I would definitely recommend doing rotation. Most of those non-human identities, again, over 1,200 types of them, most of them are static, and
Right.
they can live. We saw, I think that was like the oldest one we found, but it was like over 25 years. If you have a credential that is over 25 years,
Awesome.
like they assume leaked, it's leaked. I'm sure it's leaked somewhere and somebody. So yeah, like rotate them if you can, and if you have the context and if you understand how to do it safely without interfering the application, yes, you should do it.
Yeah, that'll make 25 years. That's got to be an edge case. I'm hoping that seems extreme. But
Yeah.
wow, that's a good one. So wrapping up here, this has been absolutely fabulous. I guess see if any further questions come through, but I guess the question just while we're waiting for any final comments, there is what does the rest of sort of the next 12 months look like, both I guess for Entro, but just in the industry in general? It seems that this is such a important and vital capability which organizations should have. I wonder what you guys are planning this year or next, or what's coming up on your agenda.
Yeah, no, we have a lot of new capabilities that are soon to be released, and hopefully, if you're gonna follow our LinkedIn page or go into our website and sign up for the newsletter and so forth, we're gonna announce them pretty soon. There's a bunch of capabilities and new support that is coming up. I really do think that again, if we're taking the IBM report and Verizon report and Gartner, you can see the increase of the attacks around non-human identities. Like they were uh, four, and now they are the second most frequent one in terms of 2 years. And I really do think that people and organizations should, like, we invest so much in human identities, and usually non-human identities have more permissions, higher permissions than the non-human identities. Usually they have admin permissions and write capabilities over databases, and stuff that like human identities, permissions that human identities don't really have. And
Yeah.
we're investing so much in protecting the human identity part. And I do think that organizations should take a closer look at non-human identities and start to allocate some resources to protect those as well, because it's definitely an higher risk.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely, as I say, you can't protect what you don't know. I think understand where you are today. The landscape, the breadth and depth of the potential for NHI, who's going to own it, the impacted stakeholders, and then obviously you can start to make informed decisions about obviously about software, but about that response process, about how to baseline stakeholders involved, how to measure success, and other things. This has been absolutely fascinating. Clearly, we'll send some links afterwards, but obviously, I guess calls to action. Really, really worth having a read of that state of NHI identities and secrets report that you guys released. Some frightening statistics in there, not just the scale and breadth of the problem, but obviously some of the impacts in there as well if you get this stuff wrong. And I think, unfortunately, at the minute, it's an adversarial attack vector, isn't it? It's a really big identity entry point for the bad guys. That identity attack surface is there. It's not necessarily being rotated, managed, monitored. So it is really a big entry point. I think as well, we talked about that sort of assessment thing, but really just getting started, understanding where you are, understanding your current landscape, the impacts and such there, which I think is vitally important. But any sort of last minute sort of takeaways for the audience there, Itzik, before we close up?
No, I hope it was beneficial for you guys, and like feel free to even contact me directly using LinkedIn. Like I love this vertical. We pioneered it. I'm doing it from the moment I'm getting up in the morning. So yeah, feel free to reach me even directly over LinkedIn or send an email, and I'll be happy to.
Don't put your mobile number out there. That'll be getting spammed with WhatsApp. But yeah, absolutely reach out. You guys are experts in the field, and I think things like the assessment, it's a good pragmatic way to at least start that journey, which I think is vitally important. I think it's we've gone past this sort of immediate enablement thing, isn't it? Really now it's action, isn't it? Making a start, finding the right sort of entry points, and building capabilities, building business cases to do so. It's a fabulous conversation. This is really it's an area which has absolutely exploded the last sort of 2 years. I certainly amplify the fact that whether it's 92 to 1, maybe it's 192 this time next year, we shall see. But clearly this is not a problem which is disappearing. It's a problem which is getting bigger, and I think it does have fundamental impacts to security, productivity within engineering, compliance, audit, application delivery time, and so on. So it's definitely a really fabulous area to be involved in, and I think you guys are doing some fabulous stuff there. So it's it. Thank you for taking some time out. Thank you to
Thanks
our
for having me,
audience.
Simon.
Not at all. At all. It's been wonderful to be educated on this stuff. It's great stuff. So thank you for the conversation. Thank you everyone for watching, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye bye.